Immediately, I heard the sound of his terrifying knocks against my door, and my heartbeat rose. My spirit quickly left my body, and in that instant, my stomach dropped like a stone into the deep ocean. Oh my God. 3 weeks of dodging phone calls, of tiptoeing past windows, of rehearsing lies that tasted like ash in my mouth. I'd practiced a dozen excuses in the mirror that morning. Car trouble, sick mother, delayed paycheck. But when I turned the deadbolt and pulled the door open, every word died in my throat. It wasn't just Blake, my landlord, standing on my doorstep. His 2 brothers flanked him like shadows made flesh, their presence filling the narrow hallway with something I couldn't name but felt in my bones. "Hello, Grace." Blake's voice carried that same gentle authority that had made me sign the lease 6 months ago, back when I thought I could rebuild my life in this little apartment. Back when I believed I could handle anything on my own. My fingers tightened on the door handle. "I know why you're here." "Do you?" The question came from Jake, the youngest brother, whose dark eyes held something between amusement and hunger. He leaned against the doorframe like he belonged there, like he'd been waiting his whole life for this moment. "The rent," I whispered, hating how small my voice sounded. "I'm behind. I know I'm behind." 3 weeks behind," said David, the middle brother. His tone was matter-of-fact, but there was warmth in it that caught me off guard. They knew my name. Of course they knew my name. Blake was my landlord. But hearing it from David's lips felt different, personal, like he'd been thinking about me. "I have some of it," I lied, stepping back as they moved forward, not pushing, not demanding entry, just flowing into my space like water finding its level. "I just need—" "We don't take cash anymore," Blake said softly, closing the door behind them with a quiet click that seemed to echo in my chest. The words hit me like ice water. "What do you mean?" "We take something better." My knees went cold and I pressed my back against the wall, suddenly aware of how thin my cotton dress was, how the afternoon light streaming through my windows made the fabric almost transparent. "I don't understand." But I did understand. Some part of me, some buried part that I'd been trying to silence since my divorce, understood perfectly. Jake moved closer, his footsteps soft on my hardwood floor. "You've been alone here, haven't you, in this apartment, all those nights?" "That's none of your business." The voice came out sharper than I intended, but my voice shook anyway. "Isn't it?" David stepped to my other side, not touching, just close enough that I could smell his cologne, something warm and woodsy that made my head spin. Blake remained by the door, watching, always watching. "Grace, look at me." I couldn't help it. Something in his voice pulled my gaze like gravity. "You've been drowning," he said simply. "Bills piling up, savings gone, too proud to ask for help. How long since you felt alive?" The question landed in my chest like a physical blow. How did he know? How could he possibly know about the nights I spent staring at the ceiling, about the wine I used to fill the silence, and about the way I'd started to forget what it felt like to be wanted? If you're still listening to this story, it means you understand that hunger, that terrible, beautiful ache of being seen. Don't just be a shadow in my doorway. Step inside with me. Hit that subscribe button, leave a comment, share this with someone who knows what it feels like to be lost, because isolation only grows in silence. Now, let's get into the full details of what happened that fateful day. I don't know what you want from me, I whispered. Show us, Jake said, his voice gentle but unmistakable. Show us why we should let you stay. The words should have terrified me, should have sent me running for the phone, for help, for anything normal and safe and predictable. Instead, they lit something inside me that I thought had died with my marriage. I can't. But even as I said it, I was already moving toward the stairs. You can, David called after me. You just forgot how. My feet carried me to my bedroom without conscious thought. My hands pulled open drawers, pushed aside the conservative clothes I'd been hiding behind since Robert left. At the very back, wrapped in tissue paper like a secret, was the black dress I'd bought but never worn, the one that made me feel dangerous. I slipped it on with trembling fingers, watching myself in the mirror as the silk settled against my skin. The woman looking back at me was a stranger, bold, mysterious, alive in ways I'd forgotten were possible. When I came back downstairs, the three men had made themselves comfortable in my living room, but something in the air had changed. They looked at me like I was water in a desert, like I was the answer to a question they'd been asking their whole lives. Blake rose slowly from my couch, his eyes never leaving mine. Beautiful. The word wrapped around me like silk, like promise, like the beginning of something I couldn't take back. Jake and David stood too, forming a loose circle around me in the center of my own living room. But I didn't feel trapped. I felt centered, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The rent, I managed to say. Blake stepped closer, close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. His hand rose to my cheek, fingers barely brushing my skin, but the touch sent warmth racing through my entire body. My heart hammered heavily on my ribs as Blake's thumb traced the line of my jaw, his touch so light it might have been imagination, if not for the fire it left in its wake. You're shaking, he murmured, but he didn't step back. If anything, he moved closer until I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. I don't know what I'm doing. The confession slipped out before I could stop it. I don't do. His honesty caught me off guard, made something flutter in my chest that had nothing to do with fear. But I know how you make me feel. Before I could ask what he meant, Jake appeared beside us, moving with that same fluid grace that had unsettled me at the door. Like we've been waiting our whole lives to find you. David completed their triangle, his presence solid and reassuring at my back. Like you belong here, with us. I should have run. Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to push past them, to lock myself in my bedroom until they left. But rational had gotten me divorced, alone, and 3 weeks behind on rent. Rational had left me empty. I started, then stopped, he climbing up my neck. Never what? Blake's question was gentle, patient. Never felt wanted. Not like this. The words came out raw, honest in a way that should have embarrassed me, but somehow didn't. Not here. Not with them. Jake's fingers found my hand, intertwining with mine like we'd done this 1,000 times before. How did he make you feel? Your ex-husband. The question hit like a physical blow. Small, I whispered, like I was taking up too much space just by breathing. Robert was a fool. David's voice held an edge that made me turn to look at him. His jaw was tight, hands clenched at his sides. You know about Robert? "We know you deserve better," Blake said simply. "We've known since the first day you moved in here. The way you apologize for everything, for the moving truck blocking the driveway, for asking about the thermostat, for existing in your own space." Tears pricked at my eyes. I didn't realize I was doing that. "You were taught to," Jake said, his thumb stroking across my knuckles. "Taught to make yourself smaller so someone else could feel bigger." They were moving around me now, a slow orbit that should have felt predatory, but instead felt like worship, like I was something precious being carefully examined, cherished. "We don't want you smaller," David said, his breath warm against my shoulder. "We want you exactly as you are, wild and beautiful and taking up all the space you need." Blake's hands slid down to rest at the base of my throat, over the pulse that was racing like a trapped bird. "Tell us what you want, Grace." I closed my eyes, reaching for courage I didn't know I possessed. "I want to feel alive again." "Then feel this." Jake's voice was rough with something I was beginning to recognize as need. They closed in around me, not touching, but surrounding me with heat and intention and the kind of focused attention I'd been starving for without realizing it. Blake's hand slid down to rest at the base of my throat, over the pulse that was racing like a trapped bird. David's hand settled at the small of my back, steady and grounding. "You're in control here," Blake whispered against my ear. "Say stop and we stop. Say more." "More," I breathed without hesitation. The word seemed to unlock something in all of us. Blake's mouth found the sensitive spot where my neck met my shoulder. Jake's lips brushed against my knuckles, and David's hand spanned my waist, holding me steady as the world tilted on its axis. I had never been the center of anyone's universe before, had never felt the weight of pure, focused desire directed at me like sunlight through a magnifying glass. It was overwhelming and perfect and terrifying and exactly what I'd been missing without knowing it. "So beautiful," David murmured against my spine, his words vibrating through the thin silk of my dress. "So perfect." Blake pulled back just far enough to look into my eyes. "This isn't about the rent anymore, is it?" I shook my head, not trusting my voice. "Good," Jake said, his smile wicked and warm, "because rent only comes due once a month." They were patient with me, reverent in a way that made me feel like something sacred. Every touch was a question, every kiss a conversation. They mapped the geography of my responses, what made me gasp, what made me arch against them, what made me forget my own name. Somewhere in the haze of sensation, I realized I was crying. Not from sadness or fear, but from relief so profound, it felt like drowning in reverse, like coming up for air after being underwater for years. "Grace," Blake's voice held concern, his hands stilling on my skin. "Don't stop," I whispered. "Please don't stop." "Never," he promised, and sealed it with a kiss that tasted like redemption. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time became meaningless in the sanctuary of their attention. They worshipped me with a devotion that rebuilt something inside me I hadn't even realized it was broken. Every touch erased a harsh word from Robert. Every whispered endearment replaced a criticism that had lodged itself in my bones. When it was over, I collapsed against Blake's chest. David's arms around us both, Jake's fingers still tangled in my hair. I felt unmade and remade, like a phoenix that had finally figured out how to rise from its own ashes. "This was only your first payment," Blake whispered against the top of my head, and I felt his smile in the words. I should have been terrified by the implications. Instead, I found myself already counting the days until the next month's rent was due. Hey, my MVPs. I can't thank you enough for still sticking with me on this story. You're the reason this channel is alive and thriving. If you've enjoyed the story, please don't just keep it to yourself. Share it with your Facebook groups, your communities, and your WhatsApp contacts. When you share, you're not just supporting me. You're spreading these stories to people who might connect with them in powerful, personal ways. Every single share makes a difference. And together, we can reach so many more hearts. Thank you for being my strongest supporters. Back to our story. 7 days went by like an ocean I couldn't cross. 7 days of waking up with phantom touches burning against my skin, of catching my reflection in windows and not recognizing the woman staring back. She looked different now. Eyes brighter, shoulders straighter, like she carried secrets that made her dangerous. I tried to return to my old routine, morning coffee, checking emails, pretending the world hadn't shifted on its axis in my living room. But everything felt hollow now, like I was sleepwalking through a life that no longer fit. The apartment felt too quiet, too empty. Even the walls seemed to echo with the memory of their voices, their hands, their promise that this was only the beginning. By Thursday, I couldn't stand it anymore. I found myself standing outside the property management office at sunset, my reflection wavering in the glass door like a ghost, unsure whether to haunt or flee. Through the window, I could see Blake at his desk, head bent over paperwork, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that had mapped every curve of my body just days before. My hand trembled as I reached for the door handle. The bell chimed when I entered and Blake looked up. The pen in his hand stilled and something flickered across his face. Surprise, hunger, recognition. Like he'd been waiting for me to walk through that door since the moment I'd left. Grace. My name on his lips sounded like coming home. I need to talk to you about my situation. He set down his pen, leaned back in his chair, and studied me with those gold-flecked eyes that seemed to see straight through to my bones. What situation is that? Heat climbed up my neck. You know what situation? I need to hear you say it. The words hung between us like a bridge I could cross or burn. I want to settle my debt again. Something shifted in his expression. Deeper, darker, hungrier. Your rent isn't due for 3 weeks. This isn't about rent anymore. The admission came out raw, honest, stripping away every pretense I'd been hiding behind. You know it isn't. He stood slowly, moving around the desk until he was close enough that I could smell his cologne, that woodsy scent that had been haunting my dreams. Then, what is it about? I closed my eyes, reached for the courage that had been growing inside me since that afternoon. It's about the fact that I haven't felt alive in 3 years. It's about the fact that I forgot what it was like to be wanted until you and your brothers reminded me. It's about the fact that I'm tired of apologizing for taking up space. When I opened my eyes, he was watching me with an intensity that made my knees weak. And what do you want me to do about that? His voice was soft, dangerous, full of promise. I want you to call them. I want you to take me somewhere I can't hide from myself anymore. Blake reached for his phone, never breaking eye contact. "Jake, David, come to the office, now." He hung up and moved closer, close enough that I could see my own reflection in his pupils. "Are you sure about this, Grace? Because once we start down this path, there's no going back," I finished. "I know. I'm counting on it." The office door opened with a soft chime, and suddenly the small space felt electric. Jake entered first, that same fluid grace that had unsettled me before, now making my pulse quicken with anticipation. David followed, solid and grounded, his presence filling the corners of the room like warmth. "She came to us," Blake said simply, and the weight of those words settled around us like fate. Jake's eyes found mine, dark and knowing. "Did she now?" I did. I lifted my chin, meeting each of their gazes in turn. I walked through that door. I asked for this. I chose this. "Why?" David's question was gentle but direct, and I could feel him reading every micro-expression on my face. "Because I'm tired of being half alive." The truth poured out of me like water through a broken dam. Because I spent 3 years making myself smaller and smaller until I almost disappeared. Because you three made me remember what it feels like to be seen. Blake stepped behind me, his hands settling on my shoulders with familiar weight. "And what do you want from us now?" "Everything." The word escaped before I could second guess it. "I want everything you're willing to give me." They exchanged looks over my head, some silent communication I wasn't privy to, but could feel in the charged air around us. Jake moved to lock the office door. David drew the blinds. Blake's hands slid down my arms, and I shivered at the contact. "Then everything is what you'll get," Blake murmured against my ear. What happened next felt like coming home and losing my mind at the same time. They worshipped me in that small office as the sun set outside, painting us all in gold and shadow. Every touch was reverent, every kiss a conversation, every whispered endearment another brick in the foundation of the woman I was becoming. Jake traced poetry against my skin with his fingertips, while David held me steady, his quiet strength anchoring me to earth, even as Blake sent my soul soaring with words that rewrote every cruel thing Robert had ever said to me. "You're magnificent," he breathed against my throat. "Absolutely magnificent." And for the first time in my adult life, I believed it. They took their time with me, patient as priests, performing a sacred ritual. There was no urgency, no rush toward completion, just the slow, deliberate worship of a woman who had finally remembered she was worth worshiping. When it was over, I lay curled between them on the small couch in Blake's office, my dress smoothed down, but my hair still wild, my lips still swollen from their kisses. I felt transformed, remade, like a butterfly that had finally figured out how to use its wings. "So, what happens now?" I whispered into the growing darkness. "Now?" Blake said, his fingers tangling in my hair. "You stop running from who you really are." "Now," Jake added, his hand finding mine in the shadows, "you stop apologizing for wanting things." "Now," David finished, his voice a low rumble against my shoulder, "you come home to us whenever you need to remember." I closed my eyes and let their words sink into my bones like promises. This hadn't started as love. It had started as desperation, as debt, as the collision of loneliness with opportunity. But somewhere in the space between their hands and their hearts, it had become something else entirely. It had become my salvation. "The rent," I said softly, because some part of me still needed the pretense, the excuse. "Will always be paid in full," Blake assured me, and I could hear his smile in the darkness. Outside, the city hummed with the lives of people who went to work and paid their bills and never discovered what it felt like to be completely, utterly, devastatingly alive. Inside this small office, wrapped in the arms of 3 men who had seen me at my most desperate and chosen to make me feel like a goddess, I finally understood the difference between existing and living. The debt I owed them could never be repaid in dollars or deeds. It was the kind of debt that could only be honored with gratitude, with presence, with the daily choice to never make myself small again. And I intended to spend the rest of my life paying it forward. I need you to tell me something. Have you ever felt like you were sleepwalking through your own life? Like you were apologizing for existing in your own skin? Grace's story isn't just about rent or desire or 3 men who saw her worth when she couldn't see it herself. It's about that moment when you realize you've been hiding from your own power, your own hunger, your own right to take up space in this world. Thank you for walking with me through this journey. If you recognize yourself in Grace's journey from invisible to undeniable, then don't just disappear into the night like a ghost. Hit that like button and let me know you're alive out there. Share this with someone who needs to remember their own worth. Subscribe and stay with me for more stories about people who refuse to stay small, because we're dropping new tales every single day. And here's the thing. If you're still watching this story without engaging, you're doing exactly what Grace did before she knocked on that office door. You're staying safe in the hallway instead of stepping into the room where transformation lives. Don't let this be just another story that washes over you. Be brave enough to leave a comment, to connect, to prove that you're more than just a shadow passing through. Because the most beautiful stories aren't meant to be experienced alone. Stay tuned for more stories. See you tomorrow.